Hi, it's Dave T here, and this part of my off-grid mini-series is really aimed at those people thinking about going off-grid for the first time. Having said that, there should still be some useful information here even for people who have already stayed in their caravan or motorhome without electrical hookup before. So to clarify what I mean by off-grid, I'm talking about staying somewhere which does not provide a mains electric hookup. This means that any electrical power that you require needs to either be brought with you or generated on site. I'm assuming you will be staying on some form of site where you have access to fresh water and can dispose of toilet and other waste safely. Also, I'm going to give examples of what is typically the case in UK caravans and motorhomes manufactured for the past 20 years or so. Older vans may differ slightly, and some vans, particularly from European manufacturers, may not have 12-volt batteries as standard. For simplicity, if your van has a 12-volt leisure battery, then the majority of this video should apply. A lot of people post questions online about going off-grid for the first time because they are nervous about what does and does not work without the mains cable plugged in. So the first thing I'm going to run through is exactly what unplugging this cable will and will not affect. Water is an easy one since the pumps in either the on or off-board tanks run on 12 volts, so will work on or off-grid. That includes the pump for the toilet flush if you have an electric one. A few mainly older vans do occasionally have some mains voltage lighting. However, most, if not all, of the lights in pretty much all vans is 12 volt based. So with the mains cable unplugged, you won't be thrown into the dark. So let's now talk about the van fridge, which can confuse some people because most have options to run on gas, 12 volt or mains. Now obviously the mains option will not work when off-grid unless you have an inverter, which I'll talk about later. The option for running from 12 volts may sound like your best option, but actually isn't for two reasons. Firstly, the 12 volt circuit the fridge runs on is actually powered by the tow vehicle, or in the case of a motorhome, the engine, and is only actually powered when the vehicle is running. So therefore you would need to rewire it if you wanted to use it, but the power consumed by the fridge is actually quite high, so that would not be a great idea. The solution is to use the third option, which is to run the fridge on gas. This does mean that you will use more gas when off-grid, and working out an exact cost is difficult since the size of fridge and ambient temperature will make a difference, as will of course the cost of gas. I made some basic calculations that an efficient fridge on the cheapest gas available at the moment would be around 70 pence per day. A larger, less efficient fridge on the most expensive gas could get up to £3 a day, so the reality is somewhere in between the two. It's also worth noting that when running on gas, most fridges will still use some 12 volt supply. Now even though this is a very low current, it does add up because it's permanently on. As a side note, some motorhomes have compressor fridges which always run on 12 volts, and if this is the case, then bear that in mind when working out your power requirements. I'll cover heating water and heating the space inside the van at the same time since they are very similar in terms of energy supply. Any type of heating is obviously going to be a big power consumer, and in most vans you'll have the option of using gas or electric. Running 240 volt heating from onboard batteries or solar requires a significant investment in equipment, so gas is the way to go when you start out. This will increase gas costs, but less so in the summer obviously. It's worth bearing in mind that even when using gas, the boiler and heaters use a small amount of 12 volt electricity. This is for the controls electronics and the pump for wet heating systems, or the fan for air-blown systems if you choose to turn it on. Most van cookers are either entirely gas or perhaps have just one electric hob plate, which tends to be a low power one at that. Ovens and grills, to my knowledge, are pretty much always gas. If you have a microwave, then this is not going to work off-grid because it requires mains voltage, but if you're on holiday, who needs to cook food quickly anyway? By far the best option when off-grid for the first time is to cook with gas, or of course fire up the barbecue. Now if you haven't already guessed, then the main sockets in a van will not work when off-grid. Some people fit inverters to provide mains voltage. The inverter output can potentially be connected to the van's existing main circuits, but that's a much larger topic. If, like our van, you have USB sockets fitted either as part of light fittings or on faceplates, then these will work on 12 volts, so work fine off-grid. The onboard radio, if you have one fitted, will work from 12 volts and so is totally fine off-grid. If you intend to use a TV, then many are available that will run from 12 volts. In fact, often you will find that smaller TVs will actually have an external power adapter along the cable that converts mains voltages down to 12 volts. If this is the case, you may be able to either purchase an alternative lead or modify the existing lead to power the TV direct from 12 volts. If your TV can be powered by 240 volts only, then another option is to purchase a low power inverter which converts 12 volts up to mains voltage. A lot of people get put off staying at off-grid sites because they think that they are going to need to install lots of expensive alternative power sources. Unless you are intending to spend long periods off-grid or are camping during winter months, then this is not really the case. So I'll try and run through the levels, so to speak, of what you can achieve and what you will need equipment-wise to do it. If you're going to be staying off-grid for just 3 or less nights, then you can often actually last without any solar power or any other auxiliary power. This is especially true if you stay at one of the many off-grid sites that offer battery charging. However, if you are intending to stay for more than a night with no solar, then you will need to conserve your power. This may mean changing your behaviour, perhaps watching less or no TV and not using more lights than really necessary. I'll link to a video above that explains what uses the most power, but as you'd imagine, it is generally things that draw very high current or that are running for long periods of time. If you are planning on staying more than a couple of nights, then you really need to be looking at having a way to replenish your battery. A quick side note here that having larger or additional batteries is not as effective as having a way to recharge it. Just remember the old proverb about teaching a man to fish. If you catch the bug for camping off-grid, or if you have larger power requirements from the outset, then lithium batteries are something to consider and make a good long-term investment. You can charge a caravan battery by connecting to the car and running it for some time. However, when you do this, the 12-volt system in the van will turn off. Typically the charge rate is pretty slow, so unless you are willing and able to have your car idling for several hours, then it is not a recommended solution except in an emergency to top up the battery a little bit. Different people will need different amounts of solar power depending on how long they stay off-grid, what electrical devices they run, and of course what time of year they camp. Solar panels are measured in watts, come in a variety of sizes and formats, and can be either ground mounted or fixed to the van's roof. For most people, 60 watts or more of solar will keep their battery topped up, providing they are reasonably careful about their usage and also of course the weather is good. The price of panels is not very high, so unless you are tight on a budget, I'd recommend going for at least a 100 watt panel, or basically as much as you can reasonably afford and is practical to carry. I have a whole video on solar equipment, but to answer the most common questions, you must have a solar controller unit in between the panel and the battery. There are different brands and types of solar controllers with pros and cons, but the most important thing is that the controller can handle the current and voltage of your particular panel setup. Ground mounted panels can be more efficient, but roof mounted are more convenient. And yes, you can use your 12-volt system whilst charging the battery. In fact, if it's nice and sunny, then that's actually the best time to use the extra power to charge your phones, etc. A lot of people ask about other means of generating power. The most commonly asked are about generators and wind turbines. Generators are fairly heavy and bulky to carry around, require regular servicing or maintenance to keep them running effectively, and unless you are keen on being unpopular with your fellow campers, you are actually better off investing the money in silent and clean solar. In fact, many sites actually ban generator use. Wind turbines are often considered by first-time off-gridders, but they are not generally worth looking at. This is because, amongst other things, they are generally noisy, also tend to only really work effectively in windy locations where you're unlikely to want to be camping. It is actually possible to produce mains voltage from your 12-volt batteries and solar system. This is done by using a device called an inverter. You can purchase modified sine wave inverters quite cheaply, however these can cause problems with some devices, so the more expensive pure sine wave versions are recommended. Inverters that can deliver high currents become much more costly and can drain batteries quickly and need to be correctly installed with heavy duty cables. It is entirely possible to run things like microwaves and standard hairdryers using an inverter, but the investment to do this can be quite significant. By far your best option when starting out is to look for alternatives to using mains power. Most electronic devices such as TVs and laptops actually use lower voltages anyway, so converting from 12 volt up to 240 volts and then back down again is actually quite inefficient. You'll be surprised at how often you can source a 12 volt charger or adapter for commonly used items such as laptops or even cordless vacuums. There are 12 volt rechargeable hairdryers and gas cartridge hair straighteners, or at least so I've been told. As you can see, I don't really have much call for either. E-bikes are becoming more and more popular and obviously require a means of recharging them. The best option is to source a 12 volt charger which can then be used either in the van or in the car during day trips. Also, many site owners will offer battery charging. The energy capacity of e-bike batteries is quite significant, so I'd recommend either charging little and often or ensuring that you have plenty of spare solar capacity. And of course, as with all of your rechargeable devices, make sure they are actually charged before you leave home. Another alternative is to bring along additional separate non-specific battery supply, often referred to as solar generators. An example of such is the All Powers unit that I reviewed and have a link for above. Many of these solar generators have built-in inverters to supply mains voltage as well as having various charge options including solar. They are a useful option since they are versatile and much more portable to get charged up either in a car or again by the site owner. Hopefully I've put your mind at rest about how easy camping off-grid can be, but if not, then it's probably worth a reminder of the benefits of staying on off-grid sites. Firstly, the majority of sites without an electric hookup tend to be somewhere between £5 and £10 a night, less than their comparable electric enabled counterparts. This means that an investment of £150 in a basic solar kit could pay for itself in a season or two. Perhaps much more importantly, to me at least, is that sites that provide electric hookups must, by definition, be relatively close to a mains power supply, whereas an off-grid site can literally be anywhere that you can access by car. Sometimes this means that the pitches are located just a little bit further from the site owner's house, but it can also give you the opportunity to camp in some wonderful isolated spaces that would otherwise not be available. Now, I'm not one to preach about the environment, but it is also worth mentioning the environmental aspect of camping on off-grid sites. Gas use notwithstanding, if you are generating your own electricity with solar, then you will have a lower impact on the environment. Perhaps more importantly, especially if you are camping with children, then living without a limitless supply of energy does make you think a little bit more about what we normally take for granted. Also, whilst you shouldn't think that being off-grid ready is a huge challenge, it is a good reason to learn a little bit more about the engineering and technology involved, which can't be a bad thing. I can thoroughly recommend joining the CAMOG Facebook group, where you can find a lively community of people with a wealth of experience camping off-grid. They provide a number of resources, including a searchable map of UK off-grid sites. I also have a number of other more detailed videos on off-grid topics, which I'll link to at the end. And in the meantime, I hope you found this video helpful, and if you have, then please hit that like button. And if you are interested in seeing some of the other videos I make, then please consider subscribing to my channel. But most of all, thanks for watching.